Dr. Michael Harrison had steady hands. For 23 years, those hands had saved lives, delivered babies, and performed miracles in Operating Room 3 at St. Mary's General Hospital. Patients trusted those hands. Colleagues respected them. Medical students studied their precision, their confidence, their ability to remain calm when everything around them was falling apart. Until the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in October when 15-year-old Emma Rodriguez was rushed into the emergency room after a car accident. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding, critical condition. Dr. Harrison was pulled from his rounds to assist in what would become the most scrutinized surgery of his career, and the last surgery he would ever perform. The operation lasted 6 hours. For 6 hours, Dr. Harrison and his team fought to save a young girl whose life hung by threads thinner than surgical suture. They stopped the internal bleeding, repaired damaged organs, stabilized her vital signs. When Emma Rodriguez was wheeled into recovery, she was alive, breathing, and expected to make a full recovery. She died 3 days later. The official cause of death was listed as post-operative complications due to surgical error. The hospital's internal investigation, led by Chief of Surgery Dr. Robert Kane, concluded that Dr. Harrison had made a critical mistake during the operation, a nick to the hepatic artery that wasn't properly repaired, leading to delayed bleeding and eventual organ failure. Dr. Harrison was immediately suspended pending a full review. Within 2 weeks, the review board, also chaired by Dr. Kane, recommended his immediate termination and the revocation of his medical license. The hospital's legal team advised settling with the Rodriguez family quickly and quietly before media attention could damage the institution's reputation. The settlement was for $2.3 million, paid by the hospital's insurance. Dr. Harrison's malpractice insurance covered a portion, but the financial devastation was immediate and complete. More devastating than the money, however, was a professional death sentence that followed. Word spread quickly through the medical community. A botched routine surgery. A young life lost. A doctor who had lost his touch, his judgment, his ability to save lives. Hospitals that had once competed for his services now wouldn't return his calls. Medical conferences that had featured him as a keynote speaker removed his name from their programs. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page. Prominent surgeon loses license after teen's death. The article included a photo of Dr. Harrison from better days, wearing scrubs and smiling confidently at the camera. The caption read, Dr. Michael Harrison, whose surgical error resulted in the death of Emma Rodriguez, 15. Dr. Harrison's wife, Sarah, stood by him initially. She knew her husband, knew his dedication, knew the precision and care he brought to every surgery. But as the months passed, as their savings disappeared into legal fees and their social circle evaporated, the strain became unbearable. Maybe you should have retired earlier, she said one evening, 6 months after the incident. Maybe your reflexes weren't what they used to be. Maybe it's time to admit that you made a mistake. I did make a mistake, Sarah, Dr. Harrison replied, but his voice lacked the conviction it once carried. Something else happened in that operating room. Something I can't prove. Mike, you have to stop this. The investigation is over. The board made their decision. You can't keep fighting shadows. But Dr. Harrison couldn't let it go because he knew what he had seen during Emma Rodriguez's surgery. He knew what he had done correctly. And more importantly, he knew what Dr. Kane had done wrong. The truth was buried in 16 pages of surgical notes, blood work results, and post-operative care records that Dr. Kane had classified as confidential for legal protection. The truth was hidden behind medical terminology that only an experienced surgeon would understand. The truth was that Dr. Kane had made the critical error and had systematically destroyed the evidence while positioning Dr. Harrison as a scapegoat. But Dr. Kane was more than just Dr. Harrison's colleague. He was the chief of surgery, a member of the hospital board, and a man with 30 years of institutional power behind him. When Dr. Kane's reputation was threatened, the hospital had a choice: sacrifice one doctor or protect the entire institution. They chose institutional protection. Dr. Harrison spent the next year trying to rebuild his life from nothing. He applied for positions at smaller hospitals, rural clinics, urgent care centers, anywhere that might give a disgraced surgeon a second chance. The rejections came in form letters, polite but final. After careful consideration of your application and background, we had decided to pursue other candidates. The Harrisons lost their house in the prestigious Willowbrook neighborhood. They lost a cabin on Lake Tahoe where they'd spent 20 summers with their children. They lost their retirement savings, their children's college funds, and most of their friends. Dr. Harrison went from earning $400,000 a year to working night shifts at a medical supply warehouse for $12 an hour. Their daughter, Jessica, was a sophomore at Stanford when the scandal broke. She changed her major from pre-med to business, telling her roommates that she didn't want to be associated with that world anymore. Their son, David, was a senior in high school with dreams of following in his father's footsteps. After the lawsuit, he stopped talking about medical school entirely. The family that had once been the picture of success, the respected surgeon and his lawyer wife, the accomplished children, the beautiful home, dissolved slowly and painfully. Sarah filed for divorce after 2 years, unable to handle the shame and the financial stress. The children chose sides, and Dr. Harrison found himself not just professionally destroyed, but completely alone. He moved to a small apartment across town, took a job as a night security guard at a factory, and tried to make peace with the fact that his life's work, saving lives, was over. He was 53 years old, and everything he had built was gone. But Dr. Harrison never stopped believing in his own innocence. And more importantly, he never stopped investigating what had really happened in Operating Room 3 on that October morning. The break came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Chun was a young resident who had been in the operating room during Emma Rodriguez's surgery. She had been quiet during the investigation, giving only minimal testimony that supported the official narrative. But 3 years after the incident, Dr. Chin was facing her own crisis of conscience. She contacted Dr. Harrison through a mutual friend, asking to meet in a coffee shop far from the hospital. Dr. Chin looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder, speaking in whispers even though the cafe was nearly empty. "I need to tell you something about Emma Rodriguez," she said without preamble. Something I should have said 3 years ago. Dr. Harrison felt his heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I was there. I saw what happened. I know you didn't make that mistake." Dr. Chen's story unfolded slowly, in fragments interrupted by long pauses and tearful silences. She had been positioned at the head of the operating table, monitoring Emma's vital signs while Dr. Harrison and Dr. Kane worked on the abdominal injuries. From her vantage point, she had a clear view of the entire surgical field. Dr. Kane was distracted that day, Dr. Chin said. He kept checking his phone. His hands were shaking. I thought maybe he was just tired, but later I realized he was probably drunk. The accusation hung in the air between them like a surgical instrument suspended over a patient's body, sharp, dangerous, potentially life-saving. "You saw him drinking?" Dr. Harrison asked. "Not directly, but I smelled alcohol on his breath when he leaned over the patient, and his coordination was off. When you stepped away to check the monitors, Dr. Kane took over the primary position. That's when it happened." Dr. Chin described watching Dr. Kane's scalpel slip during a critical moment of surgery, creating the nick in the hepatic artery that would eventually kill Emma Rodriguez. But instead of acknowledging the error, Dr. Kane had quickly applied pressure to stop the immediate bleeding and continued the operation as if nothing had happened. "He knew he had made a mistake," Dr. Chin continued. "I could see it in his face. But when the bleeding stopped temporarily, he covered it up. He repositioned the retractors, adjusted the sutures, made it look like everything was fine." "Why didn't you speak up during the investigation?" Dr. Harrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I was a first-year resident. Dr. Kane controlled my entire future. He told me privately that if I ever mentioned what I thought I had seen, he would make sure I never worked in medicine again. He said the official investigation would show that you had made the error and that my testimony wouldn't change anything except to destroy my career." Dr. Chin pulled a manila envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "But I kept copies of everything. The original surgical notes before they were clarified, blood test results that showed Dr. Kane's alcohol levels from a random screening 2 days after the surgery, photos of the surgical site that show the exact location of the arterial damage. Dr. Harrison opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photocopied documents that he had never seen before, evidence that had been classified, buried, or destroyed during the original investigation, evidence that clearly showed the error had occurred during the portion of the surgery when Dr. Kane was the primary surgeon. "Why are you giving me this now?" Dr. Harrison asked. "Because Emma Rodriguez would have turned 18 this week," Dr. Chen said, tears flowing freely now. "Because her mother still sends cards to the hospital on Emma's birthday, thanking the staff for trying to save her daughter. Because Dr. Kane was just promoted to chief medical officer, and he's going to destroy more lives if someone doesn't stop him." Dr. Chen paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "And because I became a doctor to save lives, not to cover up for people who take them." Armed with Dr. Chen's evidence, Dr. Harrison hired a new attorney, a young lawyer named Marcus Webb, who specialized in medical malpractice cases involving institutional cover-ups. Webb reviewed the documents and immediately recognized their significance. "This isn't just about getting your license back," Webb told Dr. Harrison during their first meeting. "This is about exposing a system that protects bad doctors at the expense of good ones. Are you prepared for that fight?" Dr. Harrison thought about Emma Rodriguez, about her parents who still believed their daughter had died because of his incompetence. He thought about his own children, who had grown up ashamed of their father. He thought about the medical students who would learn from Dr. Kane, potentially carrying forward his mistakes and his ethics. "I'm prepared," he said. The legal battle took 2 years. Webb filed a wrongful termination suit against the hospital, a defamation claim against Dr. Kane, and a motion to reopen the original malpractice case. The hospital fought back with everything they had: teams of lawyers, private investigators, attempts to discredit Dr. Chen's testimony and the authenticity of her evidence. But the evidence was overwhelming. Independent medical experts reviewed the surgical records and confirmed that the arterial damage had occurred in a location consistent with Dr. Kane's position during the surgery, not Dr. Harrison's. Toxicology experts testified that Dr. Kane's blood alcohol levels 2 days after the surgery were consistent with chronic alcohol abuse. Hospital staff members came forward to testify about Dr. Kane's drinking problem and the administration's knowledge of it. The case made national headlines. Hospitals scapegoated surgeon to protect alcoholic chief. Medical journals published editorials about institutional corruption and the need for greater transparency in hospital investigations. The American Medical Association launched an inquiry into St. Mary's General Hospital's practices. Dr. Kane resigned from his position and entered alcohol rehabilitation, though he maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings. The hospital settled out of court for an undisclosed amount that covered Dr. Harrison's legal fees, lost wages, and emotional damages. More importantly, the medical board reviewed Dr. Harrison's case and reinstated his license with full privileges. The official record was corrected to show that Dr. Kane, not Dr. Harrison, had been responsible for the surgical error that led to Emma Rodriguez's death. But for Dr. Harrison, the legal victory was only the beginning of a longer journey toward redemption. He was 58 years old when his license was restored, and the medical world had moved on without him. 5 years away from active practice had left him behind on new techniques, technologies, and protocols. Most hospitals were hesitant to hire a surgeon who, regardless of his vindication, carried the baggage of a highly publicized malpractice case. Dr. Harrison spent 6 months in continuing education courses, retraining programs, and surgical simulations to bring his skills up to current standards. He accepted a position at a small community hospital in rural Montana, not because it was his first choice, but because it was the only institution willing to give him a chance to practice medicine again. The work was different from his previous position at St. Mary's. Instead of specializing in complex cardiac surgery, he found himself performing appendectomies, gallbladder removals, and trauma surgery for farming accidents. The pace was slower, the cases less prestigious, but the satisfaction was deeper. "Dr. Harrison saved my husband's life," wrote one patient's wife in a letter to hospital administration. "The man who came to our little hospital wasn't bitter or arrogant, even though he had every right to be. He was kind, careful, and completely dedicated to helping people. We're lucky to have him." Word of Dr. Harrison's skill and character spread through the small community. Patients drove hours to be treated by the surgeon who had been wrongfully accused, who had lost everything, and who had fought his way back to medicine with dignity intact. His calendar filled with procedures, consultations, and grateful families who understood that they were being treated by someone special. But Dr. Harrison's most important patient came to him on a rainy Thursday afternoon in his second year at the rural hospital. Maria Rodriguez walked into his office without an appointment, accompanied by her husband, Carlos. Dr. Harrison recognized him immediately, though they had aged considerably in the 7 years since their daughter's death. Maria was thinner, grayer, with lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and inconsolable grief. Carlos looked worn down, defeated, like a man who had been carrying an impossible weight for too long. "Dr. Harrison," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk to you." Dr. Harrison's chest tightened. He had never spoken directly to Emma's parents during the original lawsuit, and he had often wondered what he would say to them if given a chance. Now, facing them across his simple office desk, he found himself speechless. "We know the truth now," Carlos said. "We know what really happened to our daughter." Dr. Harrison nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry it took so long for the truth to come out." Maria began to cry. "We blamed you for 7 years. We hated you. We thought you had killed our baby girl because you were careless or incompetent, or we thought you just didn't care enough to save her." "I understand why you felt that way," Dr. Harrison said gently. "Based on what you were told, that was the only logical conclusion. We came here to apologize," Carlos said, "and to ask if there's anything we can do to help you, to make up for the hatred we carried, for the things we said about you to anyone who would listen." Dr. Harrison felt tears forming in his own eyes. "You don't owe me anything. You were grieving parents who were told that a doctor had failed your daughter. Your anger was justified based on the information you had. But it wasn't true," Maria said. "And now we know that you tried to save her, that you did everything right, and that someone else made a mistake that took our Emma away from us." They sat in silence for several minutes. 3 people who had been connected by tragedy, separated by lies, and reunited by truth. "There's something you could do," Dr. Harrison said finally, "if you're willing." He told them about the Emma Rodriguez Memorial Fund he wanted to establish, a scholarship program for medical students who demonstrated both exceptional skill and uncompromising ethics. Students who would carry forward the best of medicine while learning from the worst. "Emma wanted to be a doctor," Maria said, her voice stronger now. "She used to say she wanted to save lives, to make sure other families never had to go through what she was going through. Emma had been born with a rare heart condition that required multiple surgeries throughout her childhood. She had spent more time in hospitals than most children spend in playgrounds, but instead of becoming bitter, she had become inspired by the doctors and nurses who cared for her. She would love this," Carlos said. "She would love knowing that her name was helping other young people become the kind of doctors she dreamed of being." The Emma Rodriguez Memorial Fund was established 6 months later, with contributions from Dr. Harrison, the Rodriguez family, and dozens of medical professionals who had followed the case. The first scholarship was awarded to a young woman who had written in her application essay about the importance of courage in medicine, the courage to speak truth, even when it's difficult, and the courage to admit mistakes, even when it's costly. Dr. Harrison continued practicing medicine in Montana for another 8 years before retiring at the age of 66. His reputation had been not just restored but enhanced by his grace under pressure, his commitment to ethical practice, and his willingness to rebuild his career from the ground up. His children, now adults with families of their own, had reconciled with their father once the truth came out. Jessica had returned to medical school at the age of 32, inspired by her father's example of perseverance and integrity. David became a medical malpractice attorney, dedicated to protecting doctors who found themselves in situations similar to his father's. Sarah, his ex-wife, never remarried. She sent him a letter on his retirement, apologizing for her lack of faith during their darkest hours and expressing her admiration for the man he had always been, even when she couldn't see it. Dr. Chun, The resident who had finally found the courage to speak the truth became a prominent physician herself and a vocal advocate for transparency in medical practice. She credited Dr. Harrison's example with teaching her that doing the right thing was more important than protecting yourself. On Dr. Harrison's last day of practice, his colleagues at the rural Montana hospital threw him a retirement party in the cafeteria. The room was filled with patients he had treated, medical students he had mentored, and doctors who had learned from his example. The hospital administrator read aloud some of the letters that had been sent in honor of Dr. Harrison's retirement. There was one from the American Medical Association, recognizing his contributions to medical ethics. There was another from the State Medical Board, praising his dedication to patient care. There were dozens from patients and their families, expressing gratitude for his skill and compassion. But the letter that meant the most to Dr. Harrison came from Maria and Carlos Rodriguez. It was brief, handwritten on simple stationery. Dr. Harrison, thank you for never giving up on the truth. Thank you for honoring our daughter's memory by living with integrity. Thank you for showing us that even in the darkest times, good people can rise above injustice and continue to serve others. Emma would be proud to know that her story helped make medicine better. We are proud to call you our friend. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez. As Dr. Harrison cleaned out his office on that final day, packing away 28 years' worth of medical journals, patient thank you cards, and surgical instruments, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. He had lost everything, his reputation, his wealth, his family, his career, because he had refused to accept responsibility for someone else's mistakes. He had spent 5 years in professional exile, working night shifts and wondering if he would ever practice medicine again. He had endured public humiliation, financial ruin, and the kind of personal devastation that breaks many people completely. But he had also discovered something that couldn't be taken away from him. The knowledge that his integrity was worth more than his comfort, that his patients' lives were worth more than his reputation, and that the truth, however painful and however long it took to emerge, was always worth fighting for. Dr. Michael Harrison had steady hands. For 31 years, those hands had saved lives, delivered babies, and performed miracles. For 5 years, those hands had been still, forbidden from doing the work they were born to do. But when they returned to medicine, they carried with them something they hadn't possessed before, the absolute certainty that healing required not just skill, but courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. On his retirement day, as he locked his office door for the final time, Dr. Harrison's hands were as steady as they had ever been, because he knew with complete certainty that he had spent his career doing exactly what he was supposed to do, saving lives, teaching others, and proving that honor in medicine wasn't just an ideal. It was a choice that had to be made every single day, especially on the days when making that choice cost everything. The plaque on the door of the clinic's new wing read simply, "The Dr. Michael Harrison Center for Medical Ethics, dedicated to the principle that truth in medicine is not negotiable." Below that, in smaller letters, "In memory of Emma Rodriguez, who wanted to be a doctor, and in honor of all those who speak truth even when it comes at great personal cost." Dr. Harrison's hands had remained steady. His principles had remained firm. And in the end, that had made all the difference, not just for him, but for every patient who would benefit from the higher standard his fight had helped establish, and for every young doctor who would learn that integrity was not just a medical school ideal, but a daily practice that could save not just lives, but the soul of medicine itself.